Welcome to Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Ekiyor. And with me today is Ms. Marianne Dennis, a dedicated special education teacher coordinator in an urban district. With years of experience supporting students with diverse needs, Marianne brings invaluable insights into the challenges and successes of working within the dynamic landscape of urban education. Join us as we dive into the vital role of special education in fostering inclusive and supportive learning environment. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you, Stanley, for having me.
Please, can you tell us about your background and experience?
So I've been an educator for 23 years. I've taught all different range of students' abilities, academic abilities, social economic status. I have taught students that come right off the planes from foreign countries that know English. I've taught students that are academically very, very strong, and I've taught students who have struggled. My credentials I hold, I'm duly certified in elementary ed and special ed. I hold a master's in reading, and really reading is my wheelhouse where I feel I can add the most value to the students that I serve in the Rochester City School District.
Thank you. Please, can you describe for us some of the common challenges you have observed among students with ADHD in the classroom?
The biggest challenge I see is the student's ability to focus and attend consistently across the board, which can impact their education, their ability to learn. All students have learning styles that are different from each other. Most students are hands-on learners, visual learners, not necessarily auditory. But when you have times where there's auditory instruction without supports, students with ADHD can potentially miss out on that instruction, whether they're not focused in attending. If they're not focused, they're not seeing what they need to see, hearing what they need to see, touching what they need to see to reinforce concepts in their learning.
As a reading specialist, right, how do you address some of those challenges?
So I embed frequent breaks, brain breaks, physical gross motor breaks. I use focusing and reattention strategies like prompting them. I may give them a visual cue card on their desk. I have incentivized some students depending upon what I feel they can handle. A lot of times it's really beyond their control, whether if they're hyperactive or if they're not attending. When I was growing up, they called it daydreaming. I break down the lessons into bite-sized chunks. I use visuals, hands-on, praising and reinforcing. I can't even say positive behavior because, it's something that they can't control. It's just how their brain works. But I do reinforce them with positive incentives and praise and feedback.
Let's talk about you being a teacher coordinator, right, of special education. What does that entail?
So when I was doing that for a very short period of time, my role was to facilitate and hold meetings, special education meetings that address annual reviews and program reviews, triennials every 3 years. And my job was to facilitate the whole process. So we had a draft IEP, and I made sure that all participants to the meeting had completed their responsibilities and that the draft IEP is compliant as far as it's driven by data and all the present levels of performance. Everything comes out of that. The goals come out of that, and that it's all coherent. And I am a facilitator of this meeting with other stakeholders on it, to include the parents and the child and the psychologist, the teacher, the gen ed teacher, the special ed teacher, anybody that works with that child. And all of the participants present their information, and depending upon how we collaborate, what information is given, we try to make sure that the student has the best IEP, the compliant IEP with appropriate goals, and that we're all clear on those pieces and that we're all on the same page to prepare the IEP, the legal time frame, and have it ready to go for the following school year.
What's an IEP?
Certainly. An IEP is an individualized educational plan, and it is a plan that is made up in collaboration with all school stakeholders that work with a specific student, to include the psychologist. It has current testing if it's applicable. It has goals for what the teachers will be working on with a student in all academic areas. It talks about any supports or modifications that need to be provided during the school day. Any services, any specialized services like speech and OT, it's defined as to where that service is going to be delivered and the duration and how many times a week. It's essentially a legal document that ensures that a student with special needs is getting specialized instruction that is specific to that child, and that all of the specifics of the IEP are clear and driven by data.
In your experience, what role does collaboration play in supporting students with diverse needs, especially ADHD?
I work as a special education teacher, bringing my experience in special education, and I can coach the classroom teachers that I work with as to behavior management, modifications. I can make a recommendation to the teacher and the school psychologist that if there is something that is really directly impacting the student's academics, that we look at potentially a functional behavior assessment, which is usually completed by the teacher and the psychologist. And that if out of that FBA, there is a behavior intervention plan that is well defined, and the teacher can use it and can collect data to see if it's effective. So my role is to make sure that the students are receiving the services that are set forth by the IEP, and that I can serve as a coach to the teachers, and I'm collaborating with the family. I'm ensuring that the family has feedback and input on an IEP for an annual review when we're reviewing that IEP. That's a very important part. And if the student is willing to be a participant in the meeting, that they're partaking in this meeting because it's their education.
Let's talk about accommodations. I don't know if you can share an example of a successful intervention.
So breaking tasks down would be one accommodation, repeating the directions, having visual support to outline directions or task completion, extended time to complete a task, highlighting certain things for the student to focus on. Those are the ones that stand out to me at this point, but there's a whole bunch of them that you can use, and depending upon what the specific student needs or what the student exhibits at any given time of the day, having a quiet seat or proximity to the teacher so that I can support that student in attending and focusing and clarifying direction.
Has there been any success story or intervention that you can talk about?
I think across the board, I've seen a lot of growth with these students with these accommodations. I think the biggest thing that promotes success with anybody, whether they're special needs or not, is developing that relationship with them. You care about the student and that you're there to help them become lifelong learners and to be able to love learning so that they take that piece into their community, into their life, and they can always learn, do different things, and have a successful life.
So, from your experience, what are some effective communication strategies you have found for collaborating with parents of students with ADHD to ensure their child's success in school?
Well, communication is really important with all children, and especially children that have special needs, and giving different modes of communication Like, phone calls may not work for one parent as opposed to like a journal or software applications like Dojo, text messages. So providing lots of avenues for communication, not just one avenue, consistent communication with positives and the not so positives, but celebrating the successes and then working collaboratively with those parents to get the child executive functioning, if you will, skills under control so that their education is not impacted. And also having the child understand how their disability can affect their academics, because if they understand that, then they can be part of the process of trying to support themselves too, because we are trying to give them information and strategies to bring into their life as a lifelong learner, not just as this is my elementary first grade student. These are skills that you bring into the world and you can teach others about them. So I guess the biggest thing is just giving the parents multiple modalities of communication and developing that rapport, and then also letting them know that they are an important part of the decision-making process, that they know their child better than we do, and letting them know that their information is valuable and that we're a team working to educate their child.
Let's talk about training. At times, there's so much expectations placed on teachers. From your experience, have you seen a training program or professional learning experience that is ADHD specific?
No. I've learned these things by collaborating with my peers. That's really a lot of what I have learned. I know that I have experience with the ADHD myself. So I know how my brain works and how I learn best. And so I guess understanding that medical condition, if you will, it helps me address students that have that, whether they are not able to attend or they're hyperactive or they're both. That helps a lot. But I've not really received specific training, if you will, on ADHD. I
So,
just know what good teaching is. And, some students need more repetition than others. I I've had education on multiple modalities of instruction, like hands-on, visual, we're all a hodgepodge of that, but most people are visual and hands-on learners.
from your experience, what will be, you know, something you want to share around training that might be useful?
Well, it starts like this. When I was a classroom teacher, I brought in all the experts that I had access to, like the occupational therapist, the speech therapist, any of them. And if I had a question or concern about a specific student, I would ask them to come in and do an informal observation and then give me feedback as to how I could work with that specific student. So I really believe it's bringing in our experts that we have within our buildings, our district, and even out of district, and just having that training to help meet the needs of all students with disabilities, whether classified or not classified. I've had the privilege of working with tiny kids that have had a lot of trauma in their life, and they're not classified with ADHD, but their ability to attend is compromised because they, for whatever reason, they're just not really there. Their minds or brains seem to be other places that are more pertinent. So I think that just having the expert and the knowledge base to work with diverse students would be most helpful. And, because children are, they're all the same in many ways, but then there's a lot of differences. And so when you're talking about students with disabilities, it would be very, very helpful to have some behavioral training, even if, it's coming from the psychologist in the building or the social worker. Because I look at teaching as this, it's like a family. Your students are your family. Your school is your family. And it takes a village to raise up these children. I mean, I look at, even children that are not in an urban setting, they still have people in their lives where they go to get advice and information. And so education is a social construct. And the more we have people to share wealth of knowledge and expertise and collaboration, I think that's the platform for working with any student.
You talked about trauma, that, there are kids who might have trauma and might exhibit similar behaviors.
Mhm.
And I know we've seen situations, or I've heard from comments from listeners, that most times people just classify kids and claim they have ADHD and start treating them like that. In your experience, have you seen a situation like that? And what would you want to share to make a teacher listening right now understand that there's a process rather than speculating?
For ADA, there's a lot of checklists that have to be completed by parents and by the teachers. It's a diagnosis that has to come from a medical profession, a physician. So it's not a matter of if a kid is not attending, he automatically has ADHD. It's got to be a process where we're looking at lots of different sources of information, including the physician, and that it's really that diagnosis comes from a physician, because teachers, educators are not trained and equipped to give a diagnosis. So I guess I would say to teachers, it's good that you see these things and you're communicating it, but it's not a given that that's what the child is medically experiencing, and that we need to have a diagnosis from a medical professional, and that it could be other factors that are contributing to this. It could be, you know, emotional, it could be lots of things. So you really need to understand the family, have the conversations with the parents. Do you see this at home? What do you do when this happens?
Okay.
But I know that a lot of teachers, they really have their hearts in the right places. They got into education for the right reasons, but I know that they really want to be able to educate these students and prepare them for college and career readiness and for the world. And it's just not a black and white answer. It's a process of drilling down into what's happening with this child. And there's lots of information that needs to be gleaned. It's just not quick diagnosis.
So, building administrators, principals, assistant principals, from your experience, do you think they are really aware of what ADHD is, other than the definition of ADHD?
From my experience, I think many of the principals knew what they were. Maybe, there's ranges of their knowledge of it, but it's quite common, it seems, um, in the community that, there's a lot of kids, it seems, that have that diagnosis, whether they're medicated or not for it, or it's more behavior modification, if you will. At least, the ones I have had the privilege of working with, I believe they understand it.
Is there any other thing that you would want to share with our listeners that I maybe somehow missed?
So I think that just like in my other career, I have to take CPR every so often to renew my license. I think that it would be great to have ongoing professional development in executive functioning for teachers to understand that, and how to promote executive functioning. There's always new research out and new studies. I think that having that professional development really will help not only support the teachers, but support the families of students with attention deficit disorder.
Thank you so much
You're
for your
welcome.
willingness, Miriam, to share your expertise and experience and insight on ADHD in schools. Your advice will undoubtedly benefit educators, parents, and students alike. So we hope you'll be able to join us next time when we reach out to you.
Certainly. I would love to, Stanley.
As we wrap up today's discussion, we want to extend a special invitation to our valued listeners. Your participation is not only welcome, it's crucial. By subscribing, sharing, and joining our community, you are helping us unravel the complexities of ADHD, weaving understanding and support into every episode. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore effective strategies and interventions to support our students.